record right now. So Cheryl and I have been talking. We've officially known each other for 2 minutes. We don't know a lot about too much about the other person, but Cheryl is I guess bravely, courageously accepting this interview, not really knowing where it's going. So first and foremost, Cheryl, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And I had explained to Cheryl, and I'll lay it out for the audience listening as well. I'm covering currently Jules' book on my show, Never Broken. Absolutely loved it. So I started following her on Instagram, saw that she was connected to the Inspiring Children Foundation, start following them, reached out to them, was connected to Ryan, who I'll be interviewing, and then also Ryan connected me to Cheryl. So it's been a little bit of ebb and flow as how we got here, but you we're going to get into your personal story, but you are a part of a shining example, a story of the Inspiring Children Foundation. And I would like to talk about Jules' influence on you, the book's influence on you, your life, where you're at now, and then the foundation as a whole. So
Yeah.
that's kind of an outline. But I guess first and foremost, start with who you are, where you're from, and somewhere in your youth, right? So you can start wherever you think is appropriate in your youth, so we and I can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah. So I'm Cheryl. And right now I'm 20 years old. And I started in the Inspiring Children Foundation when I was about 13. And I've been a part of it ever since. And it's had like a super tremendous impact on my life. And that's also right around the time that I ended up reading Jules' book and learned about her involvement in the program. So it's kind of, yeah, all
Yeah, so
connected.
it was like you read almost like self-fulfilling on really. So you read the book, found out about the organization, and then how did that connection happen?
So I started out meeting Ryan, who runs the organization, and he was helping me through a really dark time in my life when I was struggling with depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts, and really just all my negative thoughts and feelings in general. So Ryan kind of took me under his wing and was mentoring me. And he suggested that I read Jules' book. And I ended up reading her book and absolutely loved it because I just felt almost like someone understood what I was going through. And she had so many valuable insights. And I just felt very connected to her because our stories were similar in a lot of ways. And I also had been listening to her song Hands, which was also, I think, during that dark time in my life, one of the only things that gave me a little bit of hope during that time. So then I ended up, fast forward, I was getting more involved with the foundation and I got selected to go on a trip to Necker Cup. And Jewel happened to be going on this trip to perform. And that's when I ended up getting to meet her. And it was like kind of like all the stars aligned. And that was kind of the beginning of me connecting with Jewel. I got to sit down with her at dinner for like, literally, she sat with me for 2 hours and listened to me tell my whole story. And this was right after I had attempted to take my own life. So everything was really raw. So she listened to me and she ended up meeting Ryan. And then that's how kind of her involvement in my life and in the organization started.
Yeah, and I want to talk to you about the book and its influence on you, or how it kind of touched you the most, because I come from I connected to the book from a different level, one of reaching for a goal and kind of being inspired, but then having the rejection that she would undergo building her career and people not really seeing her music as she saw her music. So I connect with that side of it. I'm curious specifically what elements of her life aligned with your life that made you feel that connection.
Yeah, I would say definitely her relationship with her parents. And I had a really tumultuous relationship with my dad. And then I had a very, I guess, not close relationship with my mom. And I held a lot of resentment towards her for a really long time. So I definitely connected in that regard. And my dad struggled with, addiction and his own trauma that he didn't know how to heal or deal with. And a lot of times he would, take that out on me. So I definitely related in that regard and growing up, in a difficult home life. And then through that, kind of struggling with my own depression and my own anxiety and, kind of learning how to, I guess, navigate my adversities and my challenges and find peace. And I think a big part of her book was her like finding her own happiness. And a lot of the things that she practiced in her book, like mindfulness and journaling and meditation, were all things that have really impacted my life and helped me come out of that time. So I would say those were kind of the biggest things that I connected with in her book.
Yeah, and I do want to get to the, as much as you feel comfortable talking about it, I do want to get to some of the negativity and depression and suicidal thoughts that you had, because I work a lot with young people and I speak a lot to middle schools and high schools, and I'm sure you know because you are young, but so many kids are going through what you went through and keeping it in. And when you lay out the plan, like you in her book, and you just mentioned it as well, like the journaling, the mindfulness, the gratitude, like when when you answer the question, how do I get through it? Those are some concrete ways to get through it. And one of the things that I like the most about both the foundation, but also her book, is it's mechanical almost, in the sense that 1, 2, 3, 4, you can do these things, do this, that, and that, and it will help you. And it's not easy. It never is easy, but these are things. And she talks about journaling. She talks about doing all that stuff in her book. For you, and I guess I'm speaking to you, but I'm asking you to speak to young people and or parents who might have young kids, dealing with this stuff. What made you comfortable coming out of yourself, right? Sharing, talking, rather than keeping it all in?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'd say I struggled with that a lot for a long time. Like I was going through so much inside of myself, and I never really opened up to anyone. And I think that's part of the reason it got so bad, is because I felt alone, and I felt like I didn't have anyone to go to, or if I opened up to someone, then I was a burden, or I didn't want to take away from their life. And so I think that was a big thing that caused me a lot of pain as well. And it took me a long time to really open up about what was going on inside of me, because there were times where I opened up about maybe my external challenges, like, oh, my dad's struggling with addiction, and I just moved out of his house and I'm living with my mom and all these things. And I would tell people about the external circumstances, but it was really difficult for me to then say, like, but this is how I'm feeling about it. It was more like, this is what's going on and I'm fine. So I would say what got me comfortable opening up would be,
like, was this, I was going to maybe dive a little further if you didn't have a concrete answer, but feel free to keep going with what you were going to say.
Yeah, I would just say, I think there's like people that get put in your life.
Yeah.
And for some reason, those people they just bring it out of you, or there's like a moment in time where I think you're ready. So I think the answer is different for everyone. But for me, there are always just people that were put in my life that I felt comfortable with. And one of those people was this girl who was a part of the foundation. And she was the first person I opened up to. And she was probably maybe a few years older than I was. So she was a great ear, and she listened to me, and I felt safe and I felt comfortable, and I didn't feel judged by her. And I really saw her as like an older sister figure. And so when I opened up to her, she was only a few years older than me. So she didn't really know how to like give me advice necessarily or help me. But she knew Ryan, and she was like, well, Ryan helped me through a really tough time in my life, and I think it would be good for you to talk to him. And I was terrified. Like I'd heard of Ryan before a little bit because I'd been sort of involved with the program, but I'd never really met him. And I was terrified. Like, you're asking me to open up to this random stranger who I like don't know anything about. But I trusted her. And so I kind of made the leap, and she came with me and she sat with me while I talked to him so that I would feel more comfortable. But yeah, I would just say I think there's people that are put in our lives that for some reason help bring it out of us.
Yeah. And that's where I was going. That's what I was thinking I was going to ask, because it's almost like, because I speak to a lot of kids, and I try to explain to administrators prior to, like, what they would say, what's your message about? Or in my, like, the metaphor I have in my head is these kids are it's like they're tensed up and they're keeping all this in, and it's almost like they might not even know it, but they're looking for a release valve, something to just release all that pressure and stress and anxiety and whatever. And once it does, then they're just like overflowing with feeling how they feel. And as a, law of attraction, or I'm sure there's other words for it, but it's important to flip the switch and keep your eyes open for those things. As a young person, as a person dealing with those feelings, it's important that you intentionally open up and say, okay, there could be someone out there. And then it's like, more often than not, bam, you see 1, 2, or 10 of them. It's like a red car, then you see them all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, like, I was just reminded of this when you were talking, is for me, I think when I was ready to open up to her was probably when I was at a really dark point, and it was just, there was so much going on inside of me that I physically felt like I couldn't keep it in anymore, because it was causing me so much pain. And it was one of those moments where I feel like she was just there at the right time, like in the right space. And I just I had to. It was almost like it just couldn't stay in there any longer because I had held it in for so long. So that also was like another thing. I think sometimes we have to get to a point where, I mean, we don't have to, but sometimes we allow it to get to that point where it's just so much that it has to come out.
Yeah.
And I found myself there.
And I liken it to fighting or any pursuit, really. It's like, if you just commit to keep going, and I feel like it's like you're sharing your wisdom and experience from everything you went through, and I'm hearing it from you, and then I'm like relating it to the kids that I talk to or that will message me, and it's like I just want so much for them to understand that what you're saying is the truth. Like, you're a shining example of getting through it. And if people, young people and older people too, can just commit to taking one more step, just commit to one more day, just commit to one more whatever, then with that those eyes open, it will eventually come.
Definitely.
And it's certainly not easy, but again, you're a shining example of, yes, you're the result of what can happen if committing to move forward.
Definitely. I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about we talked a little bit about your upbringing, but talk to me about middle school. I'm drawn to middle school. The age I think earlier you mentioned was 13. It's such a confusing time, such an overwhelming time, such a and I know as I get older, I look back at it more and more fondly. I don't want to run from it. I'm like, gosh, that was something. So talk about your middle school years and the positives or the negatives, really, like how they formed what you would eventually do and what you would eventually become.
Yeah. So I would say, it's funny you said that, because definitely middle school is when I struggled the most personally. I would say, middle school is when I think a lot of like my sadness and my anger and all the things that I was dealing with like really came up. So for me, I kind of spoke to it a little bit, but my dad struggled a lot with addiction and his own depression. So I would be coming home from school every day, and my dad would be telling me how he wanted to kill himself and, how sad he was. And he opened up to me about basically everything in his life, which was great. I appreciate my dad being open, but I would say I was really young at the same time, and I didn't know how to deal with that information. And I grew up with my dad, not just like that in middle school, but pretty much my whole life. And so as like a young person, I guess I took on this responsibility that I was supposed to like save my dad or help him. And that was like my God sent purpose in life. And if I couldn't do that, then I wasn't like worthwhile. Like my life was purposeless. And so for me, all these years, I watched my dad kind of get worse and worse and worse in his depression, in his anger, in his addictions. And I thought there was something wrong with me. And I thought that it was my fault and that it was something that I wasn't doing good enough to like help him. And I would say during middle school, that really like everything kind of hit. And I think I got older and a little more aware, and I started to see like how bad my dad actually was. And I took that as like me failing at my life's purpose. And my dad and I had a very codependent relationship. So it was like, if my dad was sad, then I'm 10 times more sad, like for him.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I carried that with me all the time. And I didn't have a lot of friends. My dad was my friend, and I wouldn't want to, like, I was with my dad almost all hours of the day other than when I was at school. And when I was at school, I was in constant anxiety and fear that my dad was going to hurt himself or like accidentally hurt someone else because of his addiction and driving. And so I was just in a constant state of like worry for my dad. And then I would go home and I would spend all my time with him. And I was afraid to leave him. Like, I was afraid to, like, if I went and hung out with friends, or if I went to even see my mom, who I hadn't seen in probably a few years, I was scared that he would, do something to harm himself. And my dad was also very codependent on me. So if I was leaving, he would get really sad or really angry. And so I'd always end up staying. So that was most of my life, but definitely during middle school, I think I really started to hit like my own depression and like question my own worth and purpose. And I ended up fighting with my dad a lot more during that time too. I know when I was younger, like when my dad would get mad at me, I would just like cry and be sorry. But as I got older, I started to like talk back and kind of started to speak up for myself a little bit at times, not always out of truth, but and that created more conflict between my dad and I. So we were fighting almost every day, and then my dad was crying every day, and it was just this roller coaster of emotions. And there was also a lot of love as well. Like, my dad really did like love me. He just didn't know how to deal with his emotions. So there was a lot of love there as well. So I don't want to neglect that. Mm-hmm. But it was just really, really hard. And I would say 8th grade was definitely my worst year. I ended up getting in a really big fight with my dad, ended up leaving to go to my mom's house, who my mom I did not have a relationship with at all. And I had a lot of resentment towards her for a long time because she struggled with addiction as well, but she was very different from my dad in the sense of like, she was very closed off to her emotions. And I think when I was little, I thought like the way that my dad was what love was. And so because I wasn't receiving that same amount of like emotion and affection from my mom, I thought she hated me and like didn't love me or care about me. And she wasn't around much because she had to work and, she was struggling with other things. But so I had this like resentment for my mom for so long that I carried with me. And now fast forward, I'm moving out of my dad's house. I'm moving in with my mom. And I realized how bad I treated my mom all these years. And so it was just like all these things were happening. And I ended up basically my 8th grade year, I ended up moving in with my mom unintentionally. I just went to like cool down from a fight that my dad and I had. And about a week later, I got a phone call that my dad was in the hospital for trying to hurt himself. And that phone call kind of, I think, sent me off the deep end. And that's when I really, really fell deep into like my depression and kind of, I would say quit in a sense. Like I just didn't want to try anymore. And I quit on life. I quit on school. I quit on sports. I just quit on everything because I didn't see the purpose anymore. And I felt like when I got that phone call, I felt like I had failed. So that was kind of my whole middle school experience.
It's like I'm thinking a lot of things, but you're 20, correct?
Yeah.
And like I can't believe how well spoken and I mean, no, I guess no offense to 20-year-olds, but you speak so you just like so not even well spoken, just thoroughly thought through, like so clear, and it's super impressive. And I do a lot of interviews, and it's just, is that a result? Have you always been like very thoughtful and reflective? Is this part of your evolution as a person? The things we're talking about, the gratitude, the journaling, the meditation, like how did you get to this point? I mean, I know that's a kind of a generic question, but I'm just, as you're talking, I'm thinking, holy cow, I'm just impressed. Was there anything specific that got you to this point of?
Man, I don't know. I think it's just like, I just try to speak from the heart, but I would say I've done a lot of healing in my life since then. And a lot of, I think, like you said, like a lot of the tools like meditation and mindfulness and journaling and being open with people. And like I've gotten the chance to share my story with a lot of people. So I think it's like a combination of everything. But I always tell people, I think it's not like that's why I love this interview, like just going into it
Yeah.
without any context, because I think that's where the most genuine and authentic
Yeah.
answers come out. And if you just listen to yourself and listen to your heart, it comes out the way that it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So
in her book, actually, I was going to use this example, and then I realized it was from her book. You know, and I do want to go back to the parents and the connection that I mean, I think you mentioned it, but now I know a lot more context about it. Her relationship with her parents, your relationship with your parents, moving from here to there. I want to backtrack to that a little bit. But one of the things that Jewel mentions in the book, and again, as a professional fighter, I relate to her a lot, even though it's completely different genres. But her belief and of being vulnerable and not carrying this coat of armor. I'm the same way. It's like I speak from my heart, and if it comes back to bite me in the butt, then you know what? It comes back to bite me in the butt because I'm being as honest as I can right now at the moment. You know, so to me that's a lot safer to operate that way because then your only excuse is I was being me, right? And if I was wrong being me. It's as you're not trying to play the game.
yeah.
But the lesson you're sharing there is, again, it's a lesson that Jewel talks about in the book with parents. So maybe you can tell that I read the book. Obviously, I highly recommend people you buy the book, Never Broken, Jewel's book. Tell the listeners a little bit about her relationship with her parents and how that aligned, not exactly the same, but to your relationship with your parents.
Yeah. So I would say starting with her dad, her dad had a lot of trauma in his life and he was a veteran. And so he just had a lot of trauma that he never really dealt with during that time in his life. And his way of coping was alcohol. And that was the same for my dad. My dad had a lot of trauma that he just did not know how to deal with. And I know her mom left when she was really young. My parents have been separated ever since I was a baby. Like they were never together. So I related in that regard. And my dad was just traumatized. And a lot of times that would come out in his addiction, in his anger, in his sadness. And so I related to her in that regard. Like my dad was never very physically abusive, but definitely like emotionally and verbally, and I don't like saying abusive because I don't really see it that way anymore. I just see him as he just struggled and he didn't know how to deal with it. And I don't see it really as abuse, but it definitely could be in that category. So I definitely related in that regard. And I think that caused a lot of resentment towards my dad and a lot of sadness as well. And then with her mom, I think her mom, I kind of like relate the mom and dad both to my dad, because I would say with her mom, they ended up almost having this kind of like codependent relationship, or like she wanted love from her mom so much that she kind of turned a blind eye to a lot of the things that her mom was doing that weren't right. And I would say I had that with my dad, but I also had that with my mom in the sense of my mom was very shut down emotionally. And I always wanted her to like show me affection and show me love, because I felt like I wasn't getting that from her. And so I would say that kind of craving for affection, I also had with my mother, but that for me turned into a lot of resentment, and that turned to me just completely shutting her out of my life, rather than, I think Jewel's process with her mom was a little different. But for me being young, and I also have my dad who, sometimes wouldn't say the nicest things about my mom. So I would say like I went the route of just cutting my mom out completely because I felt like she didn't love me and care about me. And I felt like my dad did, because he was very emotional and expressive in all different ways. So I would say that's my relation to the book.
Yeah. And so how we talk about a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions. And as I'm hearing you talk, I think there's a quote that Mr. Rogers, if you haven't seen his new movie, there's a quote in his new movie where he says to forgive is to release someone from the feelings of anger you have towards them.
Mhm.
How big of a role did anger play in your emotions? And then how hard was it? You seem like a very peaceful person, so I'm sure you do get angry sometimes, but it feels like the deep anger within you is subsided, at least from the outside. But how hard was that for you? Talk about that. Talk about reconciling the anger that you felt toward those around you.
Yeah. So I had a lot of anger inside of myself towards my mom, towards my dad, towards myself, really. And it actually took me a while. I think at first I thought I was just sad and just hurt. And I was ultimately, but it took me a while to actually see like, no, I'm like really angry. I'm really angry at my mom and I'm really angry at my dad. And I would say that process of like digging deep within myself and letting go of that anger was probably one of the most powerful processes in my life. So I would say with my mom, it was almost a little easier with my mom to let go of the anger. And maybe it was because we had a kind of distant relationship. So I thought we kind of started from square one. And I want to say I'm really, really grateful for my mom because she has completely changed her life and is just a completely different, like healed person. And we've been able through that, I've been able to like heal alongside her. And we've gone kind of on this journey of like healing ourselves and letting go together. So that's been a really, really beautiful process. And so I would say letting go of my anger towards my mom was almost easier in that regards because I felt like we were just starting from scratch. It was like, I don't really even know you. Like, let's just get to know each other. Let's go on this journey together because we were both really struggling. And after my second suicide attempt, my mom really, really made major changes in her life and got sober. And, she's just, and I think we're both still growing and we're both still healing, but she's definitely like my closest friend now. So that's really cool. So I think that process was a bit easier because I realized I think I finally realized my mom was just hurt and she didn't know, just like my dad, like she didn't know how to deal with things inside of her. And the way that she dealt with it was shutting down and drinking and kind of just not being like emotionally attached or connected. So for me, I think I just realized like all this time, like my mom really did like love me. She just had her own stuff that she was working through. So that perspective, I think of like, my mom's just a human, like, just like I am, like, I'm working through my stuff. She's working through her stuff. Like she's not perfect. I'm not perfect. And yeah, so I would say that was big for my
Huge.
mom's side.
Yeah. Just letting go of that anger. And as you were talking, there's a part of Jules' book that I talked about on my show. And the quote from the book is, something my life has taught me is not to see things in black and white. People are not either all good nor all bad. Hurt people can become hurtful, and my father's actions reflected this. Like the kindred spirit ish of you and her is very super similar. And people, if you read the book, you'll understand that even more. But as you were talking, I was singing this quote, and then that brought me back to a quote that I heard that is, hurt people hurt people. Like that's the hurt they're showing you is because they're hurting. But as a young girl, you it's like you don't have the skill set, or nor should you really, to be able to comprehend that and understand, oh, my dad's hurting and this is how I should address it. So I can't even begin to imagine the overwhelm that you felt being in that position while also dealing with just like wanting to be loved by your mom and have that all work out. Like it's overwhelming, and I can only imagine that for you.
Yeah. So but it's been like a beautiful journey and I'm like super grateful now. Like we're just so close. And it's like and I think a lot of it was like, I had to be sorry for the times that I was wrong, because even though I was young, like I said awful things to my mom and I treated her awfully. And I cut her out of my life for about 3 years. And, I know that was really hard on her. So there's been so many times, even to this day, where I'll just like look at her and I'll just start crying and just be like, I'm so sorry for the way that I treated you. Like it just was not right. And so I think also, I guess that was a process of it too, was like being remorseful for my own actions and being deeply, truly sorry has been a beautiful part in our healing process as well. And same with her. Like, she's been very deeply sorry to me for things that maybe when she wasn't her best. And so that's really allowed us to, I think, reconnect on a deeper level. And then my dad was this whole process. And I would say it was probably one of the most powerful things that I'll ever experience in my life, probably. So I have to rewind a little bit. So after my second suicide attempt, after my second suicide attempt was kind of when I made the decision that I needed to turn my life around. And I was ready to do whatever it took to heal, whatever it took to be happy again. Like, I was kind of like you said, like I was willing to fight. And I was willing to try again at that point, because I had just hit for me, that was like my rock bottom, I would say. And I think you kind of have one or two ways you go when you're at that rock bottom. And it's like, you just completely quit and turn off the lights, or you have to completely change. And so for me, I chose to completely change. And part of that process of completely changing was definitely, I had to heal my relationship with my dad, because I think for a long time, I think we tend to like run away from our feelings and run away from the things that are hurting us. So like my form of running away was, okay, like I'm going to try to kill myself because I don't want to experience this pain anymore. Like, I don't want to feel this. And then we try like drinking or just short-term fixes or short-term highs that kind of distract us from what's really going on inside. And I would say I spent a lot of time trying to escape it and run away. And that's another thing that Jewel talks about, is you can't outrun pain. It always catches up with you. So for me, I knew I had to run towards my pain. And one of the ways I had to do that was to run towards my relationship with my dad, because that was the thing that brought up the most pain in me. So after my second suicide attempt, my dad kind of, I would say, got worse in some ways. Definitely his addiction got pretty bad, and he was a lot more angry. So I would, call him on the phone, and for 3 hours, he would tell me how awful I was, and, how he was going to kill himself because of me, and this, like, all this crazy stuff. And he was just really, really struggling. But I would sit on these phone calls where he would just say like some of the most awful things that you could say, but I can't really repeat them. But I would say going through that process allowed everything inside of me to come up. So like when my dad was saying these things to me, it was like every ounce of anger, every ounce of sadness that I had like ever held on to my whole life would just rise up inside of me. And it was so overwhelming. And I remember in the beginning, Ryan would sit with me while I was on the phone with him, and he would help kind of guide me through like letting go. So I would be on the phone and I would be crying and hyperventilating and freaking out. And all I would want to do is just yell back and get angry and give into my sadness and my anger and frustrations. And Ryan would be there like, just breathe. And so that was like my practice of, I was practicing meditating outside of that, but I would like literally practice meditating while I was on the phone with my dad. So I would sit there. And it was definitely a process. It wasn't perfect at first. There were definitely times where I lost my cool and it was overwhelming. And then when I would get upset, then I would feel awful about myself afterwards. And then I would feel guilty. And it was like this whole cycle of things. But over time, like the more I practiced it and the more I practiced noticing when all this stuff rises up inside of me and then choosing to like let it go, the better I got at it. And so it was like this constant practice of just noticing, letting go, noticing, letting go. And I think sometimes letting go can get confusing because it wasn't like I could just poof, like I'm not angry anymore and I don't have sadness anymore and I'm healed. But it was more like I could observe those feelings and I could choose whether or not I acted on them or not. And then through choosing not to act on them or feed into them, eventually they would pass in their own time. And so for me, it was kind of like every moment was, I have the choice right now, whether I'm going to hate or love. And so it was this constant practice of choosing love, even though everything inside of me wanted to hate or to be upset or hurt. And that was like a process of like 3 years of like talking to my dad every day. And there were times where my dad would just completely cut me off and I would call him every day, but he wouldn't answer. And then there were times where my dad would be in like a good space and we would go play tennis together and we would see each other on the weekend. And then there were times where he was just really, really out of it. And I would still go see him on the weekend or still go play tennis with him. And I would say for me, that was probably the most powerful thing in my healing process, because it literally allowed me to like confront everything head on. And I feel like root out every ounce of like anger and sadness inside me until there was like nothing left. So yeah, that was a crazy process.
Have you ever read The Untethered Soul?
I'm reading it right now. I'm on like chapter 3. So that's really funny.
Good timing. And I'd recommend that book to everybody. But the gist of it is, it's kind of like, in it talks about kind of going back in your psyche to the very back, like Joel refers to it as an archaeological dig in her book, but like back, so you can observe and be aware of those feelings and then choose to not act on them. Whereas you're in it, you're just this ball of fire, just fighting with everything and not even thinking. Untethered Soul is, I mean, you were motioning it in the video, but like kind of like event in, event out. How do I want to act? It's like that's the gist of that book. And then another thing that I want to highlight, there's a fact about buffalo. I had to look it up to make sure it was true. But when buffaloes see a storm coming, they go into the storm, whereas a cow walks away from the storm. And all that does is it makes the storm cover the cow for a longer time, whereas the buffalo turns, faces it, gets through it, boom, makes that choice to get through it. There's a book, Success Principles, another good book, but they use the phrase, one of the principles is lean into it. So what you're saying is, and as you're talking, Cherrial, like, I'm thinking how lucky I am to be having this conversation, and this conversation is like the reason I do this show, to be able to get your words to people, because the impact you have on other people literally can save lives. I'm sure it is saving lives. I don't know exactly what you do in your life, but I know that it's just, I feel lucky to be able to share it. But yeah, those two things, to lean into it. So you had to like face, because you're right, especially young people, because when you're young, you don't have as much experience as an older person. So as an older person, I get knocked out. I realize, okay, I got knocked out last year. What'd I do? I got up. I went to blah, blah, blah. Okay, I got through it. Okay, I can get through it. But when you're young, you don't have that experience. So just restate the importance of that, confronting those feelings and not running from them, that you can't outrun them.
Yeah, I think it's like the most important thing. I think it's always gonna haunt us until we do confront it, until we do run towards it. And like I said, I spent a long time running away from it, and it only caused me more pain. I turned to things that weren't good for me, that maybe distracted me temporarily, but really were not the solution, and caused even more pain for myself than maybe I needed to go through. But yeah, I would say like confronting it head on is the only way to get through it. And I think it seems scary I think I was really I was almost afraid of my feelings, afraid of my emotions. Like I was afraid to experience my anger. I was afraid to feel that pain. And I see that in my dad a lot when I reflect and look back. Like he just had so much trauma and so much pain that every time he even tried to get sober, it was so painful for him, because he had to confront his emotions, and he never got himself to do that because it was so scary for him. And I feel the same way. Like it was really, really scary, but I think we have to run towards those emotions. We have to like kind of experience them. And like we talked about earlier, I think you can experience them where you're not like in it, overwhelmed by them, where you can like notice it all and like take a step back and choose like how you act upon them. But I think definitely like one of the people in our foundation always says the only way through is through.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely been one of the most important and powerful things in my life was running towards it. And me running towards it was definitely encaptured in my relationship with my dad and like healing that. And what was cool is like I was able to heal that relationship without my dad needing to change. Like, I'm very grateful that my mom made changes in her life, but even if she didn't, I know I could heal that relationship because it's not about the other person. It's
And
about
that's
you.
empowerment, right? Like that's
Yeah,
it. That's it.
definitely. So it was like my dad didn't change in a lot of ways. He got worse. He got better at times too, but I think ultimately he got worse, and that led to him. He passed away in 2017. And when he passed away, it was like, wow, like I am so grateful that I loved him, like in a real way, in a real way. Like I don't resent him. I don't hate him. All I have is love. And I was like blessed enough to find that like before he passed away. But I think something is like I said, it's not dependent on the other person. So even if you have a parent that's passed away, you can still heal that relationship because it's all inside of you. It has nothing really to do with the other person. It has to do with your attachment to your anger or your sadness, and like being able to let go of that attachment to those thoughts and feelings. So yeah, that would.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that we came to this point because that's the truth. Because if I loved how you said it, like they could have not, they did, they didn't. It didn't matter because you changed, and that's life, right? That another um, idea from that book, Success Principles, is event plus response equals outcome. Like how you respond to that event determines your outcome. It's not that the event is the event out of your
Yeah.
hands. It's your response to it. And I want to throw this out there too for everyone. I had never heard of this movie. It's called Kodachrome. Kodachrome, Kodachrome. Cheryl, I kind of feel like you might enjoy it. It's with Jason Sudeikis. It's a hilarious actor. But I saw him. But anyway, it was about he and his dad. Kodachrome is I didn't know what it was, but it's a type of film that is no longer printed. I forget the word, not revealed, but they no longer make it pictures anymore. And so this was a journey about a older guy. He's, I don't know, 35, 40, and his father who were estranged. He hated his dad. His dad needed him to do this thing for him. They travel, from East Coast to Kansas, and I cried my eyes out. But it has to do with them mending their relationship, and the son realizing like I don't have to hate him. I don't have to hate him, and he chooses not to hate him. And then the dad passes. Well, I don't want to ruin the whole movie for everybody. Anyway, it's just a great movie.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
I think too, and I think something I didn't touch on, which I think was also really powerful in healing my relationship with my dad, was I think by me like learning that like I'm not my negative thoughts and feelings, I was able to understand that neither was he. So I think that helped me a lot in the process of like when my dad was feeding into his anger or his sadness or whatever he was saying, I knew that's not my dad. Like that's not who he is. It's just these thoughts and feelings that he struggles with that at one point I struggled with to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. So I think it gave me, I think empathy and understanding is a really big part of it as well, is knowing like people are people and humans struggle just like we struggle. Our parents struggle. They're not perfect. And for me, it was like knowing, okay, like my dad, he's not his addiction. He's not his anger. He's not his sadness. Like he's just this traumatized little boy still that doesn't know how to deal with his trauma. But it like underneath all that is just love. And I think that was a really big part of healing it as well, as I knew when my dad was saying all these things, like I knew they weren't true. And I knew that wasn't what he meant or who he was. And I knew behind all of that was just hurt. So I think that was a really powerful part of it as well.
yeah. You just created a thought in my head that I had never had before. So I have two kids. I just turned 40, and I have two kids, 7 and 4, and I certainly have baggage as a human. And I never thought of my parents having baggage. Like we all. I mean, you could be a nice, polished individual, but you still were influenced by your past. And then in the book, Jewel talks about it as the filter. Like your spirit, your the filter through which you see the world. It was influenced, and it could be positive, negative. It's probably positive and negative. Um, but I've first time I've ever really thought of my baggage affecting my kids, right? And it gives me a fresh a clearer picture of, hey, Charlie, let's have that lens, right? That filter to your kids be as clear as possible, right? Basically, don't bring my crap into their lives. You mentioned your second suicide attempt several times, and the if I can only get one message out into the world, it's to young people who feel alone. And I just talked to a person in my life whose child had recently attempted suicide and survived, thankfully. And it was, it's like you, Cherrial, are so young, right? This person was so young. Anxiety and suicide and depression are on the rise in young people, have been for the last 8-9 years. What perspective or insight or wisdom can you offer, or do you offer, to a young person who is sitting in that spot that you were at that time, on the other side of surviving? What do you say to them?
I think there's a saying we have in the foundation as well, is like, no quit. And so I think that's one thing. And I think you touched on it earlier, is like, just like make it through like one more day, like one more minute. I think it's knowing that your emotions, they're fleeting, they're temporary. This isn't forever. And I think when you're in the heat of it, it feels like forever. Like I thought my life was going to be the misery that I was experiencing in that moment forever. And that's not the case. Like if you would have told me when I was in the heat of like those moments in my life that I would have like the amount of happiness and love and joy that I have now, I couldn't even fathom it. It was almost impossible for me to fathom like a future for myself. So I think knowing that it's temporary and that it's not forever, and that happiness is possible, that there is a way out of it. And I think for a long time, I just thought it was impossible. Like, it's like, my life's going to be like this forever. Like, no way. Like, I'm out. But it's not forever. And I think we touched on a lot of it in this interview. There's a lot of like little tools, little things that you can do that can help you heal and can help you find happiness. And I'm not going to say that it's like, oh, just overnight, like you're going to be rid of all your anxieties and worries and fears. Like, yeah, it does take a little bit of effort and work, but the amount of like effort and work it takes for like the byproduct is so worth it. Like I would rather like go through a little period of time where it's like difficult than go my entire life in that difficulty and like not doing the work to find happiness. So I think when you're in the heat of it, it's knowing that like it's temporary, and that, like you said, you're not, a lot of people think they're alone. And it's funny because I've been talking to a lot of people recently, and it's just so funny. Like we all have the same experience. We all have a mind that lies to us, and it comes up with so many crazy things and ideas, but it's honestly not that creative. Like we all, like, you might think you're alone in it, but yeah, it's the same. Like we all get these same thoughts and feelings. I was talking to like 2 13-year-old girls the other day, and 13 was when I was struggling the most. And they literally recited the exact narrative of thoughts that I got when I was 13 that I still get sometimes today. But now I'm so far from it. It's like, oh, okay, like just let that go. But it's just so funny. Like we think we're so alone in it, but we're not. Like everyone's going through it. And I would say, like you said, like opening up, I think is huge. Like for me to this day, if I'm ever struggling with something, like talking it out is one of the only things that helps me get out of it. Like there's tools that I go to, like meditation's huge. Like I would say that's been the most powerful tool in my life. And it's impacted every single area and like facet of my life. But it's like you have like a toolkit. Like I have my toolkit. I go to meditation, I go to journaling, and I go to opening up. And I would say, like, for me, those 3 things are like huge. And then there's all these little fundamental things you can do as well. Like, are you getting sleep at night? Like 8 to 10 hours? Are you eating healthy? Are you exercising? Like these like fundamental things that seem really basic actually have like such a huge impact on the way you feel. It's simple as like drinking water. Like, are you drinking water?
Yeah,
Um,
it's like that. I say that all the time. It's like, again, I connect to this from a wrestler and a fighter's mindset, but the 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 things you're saying right now, it takes work. It takes work. Like, you want to be a UFC fighter? Okay, you can. Here's the things you have to do, and you got to do them like maybe forever. And there's no guarantee you're going to get there, but I can guarantee if you don't do these, you're not going to get there. Like, it's so you're talking about, and I get a lot of messages from students, and there's people in my life also that are dealing with suicidal thoughts in one way or another, and I hear some of those thoughts. I can imagine some of those thoughts because they're saying, like in the book, I think she refers to it as like a dense, wet, heavy fog, and that's what I hear from you and from other people, and I read. And there's a book called The Happiness Hypothesis. It's a really good book, and it's a trifecta. I don't know if it's like it's the something trifecta, but it's basically my life is bad, it's going to get worse, and it's never going to get better. Like it's just this cyclical of over and over, and it's just there's no hope.
Yeah.
And you're saying there is hope, and I think Jules' story, your story are two shining examples of there is hope. Right? You just have to commit to going forward, but then you also have to do those things that you're talking about. The gratitude, the journaling, the opening up, because it's not just going to happen itself.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree.
And that process, like, it can seem daunting. Maybe to round out this point, that it can seem daunting, right? So you're in this cyclical negative downward cycle, and you're like, you want me to drink water? Look, I'm on life and death here, and you're telling me to drink water. Like, it's not that one thing. It's those 5 things 1,000 times, right? So to talk about the overwhelm that one might feel when given that response, hey, these are the things that I did. These are the things that will help you.
Yeah, it does feel really daunting, especially I feel like when you're deep in it, it almost seems impossible to like, I mean, I know people that like just can't even get out of bed. Like it's literally a task to just get up and get out of bed, or to like brush their teeth, or to shower, or do those things. It is hard when you're deep in it. But I think it's like every time, like making that decision, that difficult decision, even if it's as simple as I'm just going to get up out of my bed, or if it's, I'm just going to brush my teeth, or like for me, like, I think like sometimes the meditation can seem like weird and daunting, and like, I'm not going to meditate. Like, what are you talking about? But literally, if it's just even 5 to 10, like deep breaths, like if you can just get yourself to like literally count to 10, but all you have to do is count to 10 and breathe. Like if you can just get yourself like that, I think it's always starting small. So like, there's like a whirlwind of things that you could do to like, make yourself feel better. But if you're like, get lost in the, like, you're saying I have to like drink a gallon of water every day and like exercise for 20 minutes. Like, that's awful. That sounds awful. But it's like starting small, like, okay, like I'm going to take 1 sip of water. Like I'm going to take 1 breath. I'm going to take 1 step. So it's starting small. And the more you practice just taking that 1 step, kind of the next and the next and the next gets easier and falls into place. But yeah, it does feel daunting. And I think my experience with it was a little different. I would say I don't know if it's like a personality thing or like what it is, but I think it's just, I got so low. Like for me, it was my rock bottom, and I just got so low, and I was just so willing to do whatever it took to not feel the way I did anymore. At that point, it wasn't even happiness. It was just like, I just want to live. Like, I just don't want to like wake up every day and not want to be here. And so I sunk my teeth into it. Like, I was like, all right, I'm meditating. I'm doing this no matter how hard it seems, no matter how daunting it is. Like, I'm going to do this. And there was like, just like a sort of almost hunger or it just felt like my only alternative, like my only solution. It was either that or just not try at all.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people where sometimes it just takes like one little, like it takes one little step, one thing. And I do think it takes like dedication and consistency though, like really dedicating yourself to doing that one thing, no matter how hard it is, just doing it. Like, it's like calling my dad every day. Like, it was so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was so hard to like give myself to like, I have to call him every day. But just like committing myself to doing that, such a huge impact on life. And now like, it's just crazy, like how happy I am. And I don't ever get thoughts of wanting to die anymore. And I still get, like, I'm a human, like we all get thoughts and feelings, and like random times we'll get a feeling to be bothered about something or irritated or insecure or whatever it is. But like for me, those, because I've worked so much on those, I guess, those thoughts and feelings and done so much healing, like I don't really, like I'm very much at peace now. And I say that to show like I was at such a dark place and I would have never imagined being where I am now, but I'm here. And that's how I know like these things work and that it is possible.
Have you ever read the book Breath?
No.
Okay. And if you ever have any of these questions, we can connect afterwards for these books, because it's a great book about breath, as the title implies.
That's awesome.
But it's a really good book. And then also it was funny. I laughed whenever you said it, but how unoriginal or uncreative we are. I have like these 10 mantras that I repeat for 2021, and one of them is be nicer to yourself. So it's like we're not as unique as we think, guys. It's actually the opposite. We're actually all the same, because we all have that. I've never met one person who doesn't have some degree of that. And I was around like the toughest, hardest people ever. And it's like these guys saying, oh, I was just in back praying the building would fall over, the lights would go out, something. Like, we're all scared. I won't say all, but a lot of us are scared and afraid and fearful. So you're not alone.
Yeah, 100%. And just, they're not true. Like for me, like the biggest thing was like, these are just lies in my head. Like they're just lies. Like none of it is true. And sometimes it's hard to say that when you're in the heat of it and it feels so real and so true. Like I was, the other day, I came across, I made videos before I had attempted to take my own life, and like, kind of like a vlog type thing. And I was watching them and I was like, wow, like I really believed, like I was just basically in the video, just saying every thought that like came to my head and how I felt. And I was so convinced, that like all these thoughts were true. Like there was no like, oh, that maybe that's not true. Like maybe I do have worth and value and a purpose, and like me being gone won't be a burden to other people. Because logically, like in my mind, when I was in that state, like everything felt so true, even no matter how irrational it was. And it was just funny, like looking back at them and being like, wow, like it just, none of that was true. Like a lot of my suffering, I also had to look at like a lot of my suffering was self-created. Like it wasn't, I had like difficult things that happened in my life, but like you said, it was all the way that I reacted and responded to it. And it was just crazy, like looking back at them and seeing how real like it was for me, like how real that experience was. And not that your experiences aren't real, but just knowing that those thoughts and feelings aren't true and that you can choose differently. It was big for me as well. It was just knowing, okay, I'm getting all these crazy thoughts and feelings. It's real that I'm getting these thoughts and feelings. It's real that I'm experiencing them, but what's like my belief in them, or what they're saying isn't.
Yeah.
So
I read in a book one time, instead of being your own worst enemy, be your own best friend or your own cheerleader. And then in the Untethered Soul, I don't know if you got to the part yet or not, but they're going to ask you to pretend that you were your own roommate, like your actual roommate, and if you would like living with yourself. And I was like laughing out loud, because I was like, no, definitely. I would hate me if I was my roommate. I was just chirping in my ear about how no good I am. I don't want to live with me. But it was a fun, funny exercise.
Definitely. I did that part of this.
let's talk. So we'll kind of start to wrap up here. I want to talk about something off the subject of what we're talking about, but then I want to wrap up with kind of Inspiring Children Foundation, what you do, if anything, on a consistent, like, I don't know your involvement with there, so I want to dive into that too. But what has life of COVID been like for a 20-year-old who was initially planning to take a gap year and then took another gap year and anxiously maybe awaiting to start your collegiate career? Like, what is this like for you?
Yeah, I would say I'd done like a lot of work in my life. So when COVID hit, like it wasn't super overwhelming for me or challenging. Like it just seemed like, okay, like this is just what's going on. Like I'll just work with what I got. And actually COVID was really nice. Like I got to like spend a lot more time with my mom. And I thought I was going to college that year. So it was nice getting to spend that time with her because I thought I was going to go to college. So it was nice getting that time in. And I feel like we've been constantly like healing and growing our relationship, but I'd say it's like the closest that we've ever been. And we got a lot closer during COVID. Like I would take my mom for runs outside and, we just got to spend a lot of time together. And then I was also still heavily involved with the foundation and working on a lot of projects. And it actually became like, COVID became a really busy time for me instead of like really relaxed. I took on like my first like really big project, and that was great because I learned a lot about myself and I grew a lot. And all of it's been amazing. And I think for me, it was just staying consistent and diligent in all the things that I know will make me feel better. So like COVID, every day I was waking up, I was meditating, running, doing yoga, eating healthy, like just all like the fundamental, getting good sleep, all the fundamental, like basic things. And then we also, as a group, we started like a Twitch channel because we couldn't see each other in person. So we decided like, okay, well, let's just do what we do in the office or in our lives, like on a computer. So we started this Twitch channel. So I started leading meditations and conversations and yoga, and we do fitness as well. And it was so amazing because I guess I've just figured out like, wait, like you can connect with people virtually too. Like it doesn't have to, because I think a lot of people during COVID maybe lacked a lot of like social connection. And I think connection is something we thrive off of as humans. And it was cool starting the Twitch channel and being able to like maintain that connection with people I already knew, but also build new connections with people. Like I met this one girl, like literally on Twitch, and she just messaged me like a couple months ago. And she was like, I'm doing so well. Like, I'm so much happier. I've been really doing those things that, you talked about, and like, I'm feeling great. And during COVID, like she was suicidal. And so it was just crazy, like getting to have like those connections over like a little like online platform.
Yeah.
So it was like a busy time with a lot of work and like building that out and then doing other projects, but it's been great.
And what do you do you're in Vegas right now, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And you and I were kind of briefing this beforehand. We didn't really know a lot about the other person and or other situation, but do you work on a daily basis with the foundation? And if so, what you mentioned some projects, but I guess kind of what position do you take within the foundation, and what are some of the things you do?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say like what position because I really don't know. I guess my position would be I'm a postgraduate intern. So I basically just kind of do whatever I do. Like
You just be honest to goodness, like you just be you, and being there is their mission and their message. So that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like whatever projects they need help with, like I'm here, and we create our own little business plans and stuff. So I have like certain projects that I want to work on. Like I want to build out our Inspire House channel. So I want to build out Twitch and YouTube and start doing stuff like that. And that's my big project for the next 6 months until I think go to college.
Yeah.
Who knows? But yeah, so I'm there on a daily basis. I've been there on a daily basis for probably the past like five years of my life, during high school, all throughout high school. Like I had school, but I would also intern with the foundation and do different projects on the side, go to different like events, like the one that I met Jewel at, and so we do a lot of stuff. And then the last 2 years has been my postgraduate internship, which was only supposed to be a year, but because of COVID, it's been extended. So I'm taking 2 gap years, and I got into Stanford, so I'm going to Stanford next year. And
Congratulations. And you'll play tennis or no?
No.
Okay.
Club tennis.
Got it.
But yeah, and so I got into college like 2 years ago, but I haven't gone yet. So
you forgot about it already. I got it. Whatever happened to that college thing? I don't remember.
Yeah, but so I just kind of help out around, and I think a big part of our program is mentorship and like creating meaningful relationships. So I just have like so many meaningful relationships with so many different people, and it's definitely a gift to be around like a group of humans that are all just striving to like heal and be better. And I think there's no better environment or place to like, other than like a group of people that are just striving to like heal and be better. So I also, right now I'm living in, for about 4 years, I lived in a transitional home with my mom that the foundation provided for us because my mom was struggling with work. And, oh, sorry, my thing just disconnected. But we were living in this transitional home for like 4 years, and we would house other people and, help them when they were struggling. And then my mom literally during COVID is when my mom got her own apartment finally and kind of made that like next transition in her own life. So I moved out with her, which was great because we got to spend a lot of time together, but it was also a little sad for me because I love the transitional house and I love all the people. But recently, I've actually like moved back in to kind of take like a more like leading role in the house and just help out for a little bit. And especially because I'll be going to college probably soon. So just like making the transition a little easier for my mom and not being around as often.
Yeah.
So yeah, so now I'm living back in the transitional house. So that's really cool.
Well, this has been awesome. I'm excited to talk to Ryan. I'm excited to share Jules' book, and I'm glad by way of that I came on to the foundation, and I'll be continuing to talk about it this week, and probably in perpetuity, to be honest. I do a lot of work with young people, different Zooms, and I have an online school, et cetera. So there's a good chance I'll reach out to you in the future to see if you'd want to do something on that front as well, just to share your story. I'll certainly be sharing your story by way of this interview. But any parting words you want to say to anyone listening, and or your social media, and or the foundation social media? And again, I'll be talking to Ryan, so I'm sure we'll cover this stuff as well. But any parting thoughts or things you'd like to say, please have the floor.
Yeah, I guess. Well, my project this like next 6 months is building out Inspire House. So it's Inspire House on YouTube. And then it's Inspire House on Twitch. So twitch.tv/Inspire House. And then we also have an Instagram, Inspire House LV. And then there's the Inspiring Children Instagram as well for the foundation, which is, I would say, like, I feel like I didn't get to talk about it too much, and I'm sure Ryan will get to talk about it.
Yeah, that's kind of what my game plan was, but yeah.
So, but the foundation's helped me so much in my life. Like, definitely, I did say meditation was the most powerful tool, but I learned that tool from the foundation. So I would say that the foundation has been like one of the most crucial parts in my healing, and they help a lot of people. So,
and I'm actually glad you said that. And this is like the opposite of a conclusion. This is kind of getting back into the meat of the conversation. I meant to ask you that when you say meditation, I've read enough about it. I am familiar enough with it to not see that as like daunting, foo-foo weird stuff, right? So can you just explain to someone who's thinking, oh, I'd like to do that, but I don't even know what she means, what that means to you and how you do it?
Yeah. I mean, if you want, I do like this 10 breath meditation. If you want to do it with me, it's like,
go for it.
It's just 10 breaths. But basically when I first heard about meditation, I was like, what the heck? Like, I thought it was like a religious thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know much about it. I thought it was kind of like hocus pocus. And then I realized like, it's just it's a breathing exercise. Like, it's not a real, like it can be a religious thing if you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be. It's literally just a breathing exercise that is now like scientifically proven to like change your brain and do all these crazy things. Just like look it up and you'll figure it out. But for me, I do just a simple like mindfulness meditation where I just it's all about becoming aware. So I think when we think of meditation, sometimes, at least for me, I thought like I had to get rid of my thoughts, like that I was supposed to be focused and concentrated. And if I had thoughts, that was bad and I'm not supposed to have thoughts. Whereas it's actually like the opposite. You just notice that you have thoughts. Like you notice how much your mind is actually running, because it's so easy to function, I think, on the day to day of just on autopilot. Like you're just constantly listening to that voice up here, that inner roommate. And so for me, like meditation's just simply like a practice of awareness and like noticing how crazy my mind is, noticing all these thoughts that come up. And then once I notice them, instead of like getting lost in them, just gently bringing my attention back to my breathing, back to the present, back to what's actually like going on, which the breath is a really powerful tool for. It's just back to my breathing. Yep. And you'll notice you'll get lost in a daydream sometimes for like 1 or 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And like, whoa, like where was I? But that's like where the power is gained. Is like, you just, oh, where was I? All right, back to breath.
Yep.
So it's not bad if you get lost in thought. I think that's a big like misinterpretation sometimes.
You're not
and
wrong.
I think that turns
you didn't
people
mess up. That's like,
yeah.
That's
and it turns people off too, because
yep.
they're like, I'm not good at this. I can't do it. Like I can't focus.
Yep.
And it's like, it's not about that.
Yeah.
So I just do this thing where I count my breathing. So I inhale and then I exhale and I count 1 in my head. Then I inhale, exhale, count 2, and I close my eyes. And I just count up to a number. So sometimes that's 10, sometimes that's 100, whatever it is. And you'll notice like when you're counting up to that number, you forget what number you're on because you get lost in thought, and it's fine. You just gently bring your attention back to the last number you remember. And it's really just attention to your breath. But sometimes I think the numbers kind of help. It's just something to like bring your attention back to. So yeah, if you want to do it, it's just 10 breaths.
Go for it. And I don't know, audio, we'll either keep this in or edit out, but I'd like to keep it in and people at home just do it as we do it.
Cool. All right. I can say, sometimes I just say ding and then we go and I'll say ding when I finish.
Yeah.
All right.
So it's
ready?
Just in, out, count.
Yep.
All right. Go for it.
All right. Ding. Ding.
So I opened my eyes before your ding because I wasn't sure if you were looking at me or if I was looking at you. So then I went back into it. But again, I'm going to say the book Breath again, because that's right down your alley. And then also the book Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday, which is another great read.
Okay, awesome.
So to all of you, I recommend those books. Cheryl, obviously, I'll repeat them to you if any of them slip your mind. But that's it, folks. That's as simple as it is. For anyone listening to audio and thinking, what the heck are they doing? We were breathing. It just helps bring you back to that archaeological dig to your unbroken self, to put it in Jules' words. But this was great. I appreciate every minute of your time, and what you're doing is special, and it's saving lives. And I'm honored and humbled to have you on the show, Cheryl.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation, and I want to learn more about your life. I know you are busy, but
oh yeah, I'm happy to. I'm gonna end recording here, and then I'm happy to talk or set up another talk or however that may be. But thanks so much again for you and for what you're doing. You're a really special person.
Thank you.